Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Wilder Ride, our Listener's Lounge, a sidecast to our main podcast, where instead of looking at a movie 1 minute at a time, we look at a guest and check out their life 1 moment at a time. I'm your host, I'm Alan Sanders.
I am your co-host, Walt Murray.
And Walt, before we bring on our guest, I had a chance to spend some time out of town this weekend, which meant you spent time in my stead in the studios on a weekend.
Yes, that is correct. Even in spite of my last go-round in your illustrious chair there, I was invited back. I guess it's basically that you're so desperate to go on vacation that you're willing to even have me sit in for you.
Yeah, well, it's the method where you pick somebody who is just good enough to keep the audience, but just under me, so that way they welcome me back.
Well, you must be pulling from a very, very limited group because...
well, that's my problem, because I'm already crawling on my belly, so what do I find lower than me? And
that's
look
true.
At you.
Good point.
I found you. No,
Good
just kidding.
Point.
Actually, if I charted the amount of time I had to spend troubleshooting over the phone from vacation the very first time to the second time to this most recent time, this one was just one simple question. Why don't I hear Fox News? Oh, I don't have the right slider up. That was it.
There you go.
You were, and it sounded so good. You sounded like you felt comfortable. You weren't rushed to a break. You weren't like, you were good. It felt like you got right behind the microphone. Okay.
Well, the world did me a favor. There was a really nice story in the news that gave me the opportunity to slam communism for 10 minutes. So that made my opening monologue very, very easy. and went uphill from there.
Well, what I loved about your story, and to be honest, because we don't get political with this show, but what you talked about made sense. You experienced life behind the Iron Curtain before it fell. So
yes.
You had a perspective of somebody who's visited Eastern Bloc countries before the fall of the wall. So, I know there is the cool thing for some of the kids out there is this idea of moving in that direction, but you have a sense of seeing it firsthand. And I like how you brought it in with what's going on in Cuba right now, a country that's just 90 miles to our south.
Yeah. And whenever I see the news coverage of it, I'm you see it through different filters. You see it through more liberal and more conservative filters. And I think that both sides are kind of missing things on either end. But the bottom line for me, talking to my friends who have come from Cuba, who have family in Cuba, and, that the Cuban people are done with the socialist communist regime. Whether the theory would work somewhere, who knows?
Well, I think what they're done with is a dictatorship where
right.
There's nothing for the people, and that's it.
There's
if you're going to
for
do
the
something, they want to be able to live. They want to be able to enjoy life. I mean, who doesn't?
Yeah, and I think what we've seen in history is that when you consolidate power like that, the power corrupts, and those corrupt individuals who have the power begin to just take from the people, and I don't know whether it's human nature
or they choose not to separate themselves from what they've amassed to make it more even. So
yeah,
it's a tale, unfortunately, that's gone through history, but it continues on. And I think that's one of the cyclical problems of man, because that's what we deal with,
Yeah. And I think that the misconception, and not to get too political, but I think that the misconception that people have is that it's more fair than capitalism, or it's more fair than some other form of government. It is not fair. It is a totalitarian regime that murders people who disagree with them. One of the things that the U.S. and other governments are trying to do is get people the opportunity to have the internet,
right,
so that they can hear outside voices other than what's being force-fed to them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is that the kind of world that people want to live in? I don't want to live in that kind of world. So I don't think any of us really do if we think about it. So Yeah, so that put the ball on the tee for me, and and hit a hit a nerve with me. So
well, it was poignant because you did it also in light of the Olympics that are going on at the time of our recording, where the spirit of competition, of friendly competition, of country pride, and trying to like root for your athletes and root for your country, and you're hoping your country or your athletes are trying to perform well for your country. I mean, that sense of togetherness, it was nice dichotomy of bringing these stories together about wanting freedom, the yearning to be able to do what you want, and then watch these athletes who are out there competing in a friendly environment against one another.
Yeah, and one of the cool stories, and you hear all these stories of, this guy's mother passed away right before the Olympics started, or this person, dropped a log on their leg 6 months before, and here they are competing. So you hear all these kind of cool stories of the human spirit triumphing. But one of the stories that was covered right at the beginning is one of the two flag bearers for the U.S. team is a gentleman whose family came over from Cuba. So you have just a very stark contrast between him carrying the U.S. flag, and he had a lot of great things to say about the United States, and then this horrible Cuban regime that is just obliterating any opportunity for a good life at all for the Cuban people. So it was a great, easy contrast to draw, and a lot of fun to talk about. And then, of course, got to talk about the 101-year-old lady who still goes out every day and lobster fishes. And she goes out 3 times a week now with her.
Yeah, with her son,
who's what, like 80.
80. I heard that, and I'm just like, and then I heard BK. He goes, I barely can come to the radio, and I'm only 56. And this woman goes out 3 times a week on a boat and pulls up cages from the water at 101.
Well, and it's funny because just last week I was watching. I'm trying to kind of like you, trying to watch TikTok and all these other things. And so my kids were like, yeah, just go on TikTok and type in something that's interesting to you. So I typed in fishing, and these guys recorded themselves lobster fishing. So I had watched about 10 minutes of lobster fishing, and let me tell you, it is not easy.
Mm-mm.
I mean, those guys are, from the first basket
on, just the balance you need to have alone.
Oh, yeah.
Just,
Yeah, to have your sea legs like that. And then all of them have knives hooked to their sleeve in case they get pulled into the water by the lobster trap. They can cut the string off and hopefully float back to the surface. And I'm thinking, that is so different from my job, where I sit and go, where am I going to have lunch today?
What fast food joint's going to kill me today? Like, that's your biggest danger.
Yeah. Should I leave my shoes on or take them off while I work?
Please leave them on, please. Well, I was going to say, by stark contrast, while you were dealing with, items of patriotism and society and repression and regimes, I was getting totally blitzed every day at my friend's 60th birthday party up in Blue Ridge, Georgia.
That is great.
It was a good way to spend the weekend. Well, and in all honesty, it was supposed to be for his 60th birthday, which was actually last year, but because everything was locked down in the middle of his birthday, we decided to rebrand it. So all of his shirts said Happy 60th, but over the 60, instead of having like the circle with the cross through it, I put a mask, as if the mask was like blocking the 60, and then said, actually Happy 61st birthday. And so we just had an entire 61st theme, but it was cool. It was really fun to just be able to go out to some town up in the mountains. The weather cooperated. We only got a little bit of rain, but that wasn't bad. We took a train ride up to McKaysville, which is a town. Literally, there is a blue line in the middle of town. Half of McKaysville is in Georgia. The other half is in Tennessee. You can actually stand with one foot in each state if you wanted to. It was just a lot of fun to be able to do that. And then we went to an orchard the last day we were there, where they have, apples and peaches and pecans and all the stuff they grow.
That's great.
And they have a restaurant built in that everything that they have in the orchard was part of the breakfast. And it was just a really good time to be able to hang out with friends. So we sort of made up for, we couldn't celebrate the 60th when he turned 60. So we made his 61st a big deal.
That's great. That's great. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And there was a lot of music, a lot of stuff happening in the background. It always is fun when you're having a good time. Music is sort of what accentuates and punctuates life. We all like, like to wonder what would be the soundtrack to the film if it was based on us, right?
Exactly.
Well, you know what? That's a perfect segue. And I'm good like that. See how well I did that?
Yeah, that was a surprise. Surprise win. Good job.
It is amazing how I could do that when I know who my guest is. But we have a guy who has done more to instruct me in music theory, music emotion, music construction, and composition than I think I would have ever learned in any class. And oh, by the way, I am a musical mental retard, for lack of a better word. I have no musical ability whatsoever, but I have awesome appreciation for scores, for music, for soundtracks, obviously for rock, for other. You and I have talked many times about our love of music and our wish we could play. In this case, we are bringing in a guy who has a YouTube channel called Listening In, and you truly can learn a lot simply by listening into his channel. A guy from across the pond. We're going to go to the UK. Everybody put your hands together. Let's welcome our guest, Barnaby Martin. Barnaby, welcome to the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
I have been, it's a weird sensation to just be in awe of someone's YouTube work. I mean, normally I look at YouTube and go, what the hell were they thinking? Why did they put that out there? That's forever. That's going to be forever haunting them, right?
It's true. I mean, a lot of people put a lot of very strange things up on YouTube.
But you have really turned the art of teaching somebody about why a score works or why music does what it does or how the composer approaches the particular film that they're trying to create an ambiance or an atmosphere to. And you just make it easily understandable, even when you're using terms I have no idea what you're talking about.
Actually, interestingly, that is one of my most common comments that people say, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I like this anyway, which is really nice. I appreciate that.
So before we start, and we always do this with every one of our guests, because I don't know your totality of your background. I know what you've produced, and I was so intrigued. I invited you, and I'm really happy you were able to carve out time for us. Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. When did you first realize you had an affinity or an appreciation for music? Even before YouTubing and lecturing and breaking things down, when did your music love start?
Wow, that was a long time ago. So I started off life as a singer. So I sang in lots of choirs when I was young. I did lots of solo work as well. So I was in the sort of English choral tradition. We have a lot of choirs over here in England. So I just did a lot of singing, and I didn't really, compose much music or write much music or do much music analysis until much later. But that sort of all grew out of loving singing and loving choral music and things like that. And actually, when I was in high school, the equivalent of high school in the UK, I started to write music. I started to write music properly, sort of choral music and also orchestral music and chamber music and things like that. So, and that's really what led to YouTube, because over the many years of doing the composition, I actually wanted to be a composer. I wanted to write orchestral music and not film music. Actually, the film music, I love film music, but I didn't want to necessarily go down that path. But I wanted to write what we call contemporary music, which is just orchestral music, concert music, basically, music for the concert hall. But before I started my YouTube channel, so this was 2.5 years ago now, I had sort of hit a bit of a creative rut in terms of my composition. I wanted to try and do it full time. I wanted to try and make it as a composer, but there's basically no money in it. So, and you have to rely upon a lot of people to ask you to write music or to put your music on or to perform your music. So it was a really sort of challenging thing. And I thought, well, I need to do something creative. I need to do something that I love and that I can do without anyone, sort of any gatekeeper, basically. So I decided to start a YouTube channel. I've been watching, I don't know if you've come across other music YouTubers like Adam Neely, Polyphonic and 12 Tone, people like that. And I was watching all their videos and thinking, these are amazing. These are immensely creative and exciting. And I think it was a sort of growing industry of music YouTubers and also video essayists. I was watching a lot of Nerdwriter, a lot of things like that, and thinking, well, okay, can you create music analysis, in particular film score analysis, in a really engaging story film-like way? Can you make it emotional? Because actually, fundamentally, the way that I experience and the way most people experience music is through emotion. People don't really talk analytically about music most of the time. People don't know the language or don't really care much about the language. And although I do use it relentlessly, I do use that sort of analytical language, I think what I try and do all the time is make it emotional, make it something that people can connect with. And I'm still sort of learning to strike that balance between something that's too technical versus something that's going to be engaging to a lot of people and a wider audience. But yeah, I love it. I love creating these videos. They've sort of been a bit of a lifeline for me, and composition has sort of slightly gone by the wayside because they just take so much time, these videos.
Yeah, I was going to say, you almost had to learn how to become a video editor as well, because you have a lot of complexity. It's not just filming yourself as a reaction and then just editing out parts you didn't like. It truly is creating a mini documentary or a mini instructional video.
Yeah, and that's Node Writer was the model I took for that. That sort of voiceover plus entirely edited video with animations and everything. And that, just learning how to do that was a really steep process. But I wanted to make something that was engaging. That it's just really tough, and you just have to do it yourself. And this whole self-made thing of YouTube, so many people have done it now, and there are all great ways of learning online how to use Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere and things like that. But actually, I find that the video editing part is as creative as anything else. Sometimes it's the most creative part. I mean, you write the script and you do the audio editing and everything, but when it comes to the video, I sort of try and create this little world of the video where it's in a new style, so that every video has a sort of unique flavor, which I really like that approach. And I think it's not done a huge amount. Most people just do the, to camera and then chop it up, because frankly, that is the easiest way of doing it. I've done it once. It was really easy, but I was a bit sort of bored by it. It wasn't challenging enough, so I moved away from that.
Well, when you're working on your YouTube channel, what is your perception of the audience that you're shooting for?
That's a really interesting question, because I don't really know, because it depends upon the video. I mean, for example, I released a couple of weeks ago a video on James Bond and the theme for Spectre that was rejected for Spectre, the Radiohead theme. That's been viewed by nearly 500,000 people. I don't know who those 500,000 people are. I mean, those are amazing numbers, but I couldn't tell you how many of those are sort of Radiohead fans or James Bond fans or music fans, or just happened to watch the video because it was recommended to them by the YouTube algorithm. So in a sense, all I have to do is create a video that I'm interested in, because if I try and second guess the audience, I'm sure you're the same. You probably think when you try and create a podcast, you don't want to try and, if you try and tailor it too much to the audience, you sort of lose sight of what the thing is. And if I do that, then I have done that maybe once or twice in the past, and I've gone down a path and I've gone, no, I'm not really that interested in this. I'm just trying to make it as engaging as possible. But actually, this is not a topic that I really want to make a video about. So I just make it for myself and hope that people like it.
So what kind of audience feedback are you getting? And obviously, like, there are tons of James Bond / Radiohead fans, so that makes it kind of easy. You get a lot of crossover there. But
yeah, there is. Yeah.
What kind of response do you get?
The response is usually overwhelmingly positive, and it gets some really lovely comments. But there are sort of three categories of comments. There's the really nice comments that people say this is great and they like what I'm doing. Then there's the comments where people sort of generally just say something on the video. And actually, one thing that happened on that Spectre video, it was a sort of slightly awkward topic, because of course the Radiohead theme for Spectre was rejected, and it's Sam Smith's, I don't know if you remember Sam Smith's writings on the wall, was chosen, and I very specifically didn't say anything either positive or negative about Sam Smith's song, because I knew that some people really love it and some people really don't like it that much. But interestingly, a lot of people sort of came in the comments and said negative things against Sam Smith's song, which I actually didn't really like that much, because I intentionally try and create a very positive feel for my channel, that every video is positive and I rarely say anything negative. And that was the case. So sort of when the comments become like that, that's a bit difficult. But it's not against me, it's just against the song that I wasn't even talking about, which is a slightly weird one. And sometimes...
just to interrupt you on this, I got the sense, because ironically I did watch that and read through some of the... I didn't read all of them, because you sometimes will get thousands and sometimes you'll just get a few. It just depends on the video. I got the sense it was a reaction to Radiohead being rejected not once but twice in favor of Sam Smith. That it was more of a, how do you reject something this well crafted in favor of... Not that Sam Smith was bad, but now that you know there was a better option out there, I got that sense that it was more of the reaction of, how does the studio reject them twice?
Yeah, that is a good point. There were definitely a lot of comments in that vein. Yeah, and actually, I sort of agree. The first one, the Man of War song, which wasn't written for the film, I do understand that. But then the new song for the Spectre song was so good that I don't understand why that was rejected. It just seems so strange to me. But the final sort of category of comments is the one that's actually negative against me. But in general, I think it's true of any YouTuber who does voiceover. You tend to get fewer comments because, I don't know, people seem to engage more with the material than you as a person or a personality. And in some respects, that can actually be bad for your growth, because people would tend to engage more with a personality if they can see them. But they'll also be much more likely to give negative comments and criticism, because there are just some slightly strange people out there who will criticize people's appearance or the way that they speak or their intonation or things like that. But I generally don't get that, which is quite nice. My channel is generally, and I'm touching wood here, positive, and I hope it will stay that way, which is nice.
Since a lot of times what we do with our flow is to kind of go like, beginning, then middle, and as a career, all your object. But you've done a great job summarizing and getting us to where we are. And I wanted to maybe do a little different show with you. Let's stick with James Bond, because that was one of your most recent ones. We've got a new James Bond, hopefully finally coming out this year. They kept trying to release it last year. Obviously, they had to put it off. You can't use Radiohead anymore because it never was actually used. So even though your title was the best James Bond theme, it technically wasn't a James Bond theme.
It technically wasn't.
If you had to now go back, because I know you kind of touched on some of them and you hit, and unfortunately we also have a wide range of from 60s through contemporary. Do you have a backup favorite James Bond theme?
I actually do. It's GoldenEye, Tina Turner.
GoldenEye, I found his weakness. GoldenEye, he'll do what I please. GoldenEye.
Yeah, I really like it. I'm probably people. Actually, the other one is Nobody Does It Better.
But somehow you found me. I tried to hide from your love, but like heaven above me, the spy who loved me.
Which, interestingly, I said in my video that the best Bond songs are in minor keys, but that's in a major key. So Nobody Does It Better with GoldenEye. I think GoldenEye because it was when I was growing up. That was the sort of James Bond era with the Pierce Brosnan era. That's what I was watching. And the other one I think is Chris Cornell for Casino Royale. Which I think actually those sort of fall with Spectre as well. I'd say are the best. It's just the ones that are more, I don't know, more interesting, more engaging, or a little bit less. I don't know what it is about. There's the sort of flavour of them. I need to do a video about it
I think it'd be fun, and this is where we're going to have fun with a little bit of word, just kind of free association. There's not really a format as much as we're just having a great conversation. Is with James Bond, you have unique James Bonds. You have people who say, well, Sean Connery is my James Bond, or the only James Bond. I'm with you when it comes to You Know My Name by Chris Cornell, because they were introducing a brand new Bond that was going to be grittier, harder, maybe even more to the books than to film, or certainly not the Roger Moore. I love that version simply because from a tonal perspective, it's emblematic of the Daniel Craig character, and the fact that that music is then interlaced into the score throughout, I love. I think it's just a great melding of everything.
Definitely, because that was actually written by, I don't know if you come across David Arnold, film composer. He's a Brit who's obsessed with James Bond. So he was brought on for Casino Royale. That was his first movie. So he wrote with Chris Cornell. He wrote that song, and so therefore, all the theme was used throughout the film. But David Arnold had created, I don't know if you've come across it, but I'd look it up. There's an album called Shaken and Stirred, I think it's called. It's on Spotify, where he spent, I don't know how long, but it must have been an incredible amount of time, basically remixing all of the old Bond themes, because David Arnold is such an obsessive Bond fan that he remixed all these amazing Bond themes, so there's like Diamonds Are Forever and all the Moonraker and these classic Bond themes that he made into these sort of electronic tracks and added sort of lots of contemporary orchestration to them. Go back and listen to it, it's great. But his scores for, I think he did Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and no, he didn't do, because Skyfall was Thomas Newman. Thomas Newman was the first with Sam Mendes, because of course that was the change in director and a composer for that film, for Skyfall. But yeah, for Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, David Arnold did it, and he's just an amazing composer, and he sort of knew that sort of John Barry style of orchestration, that big band. It's basically just a big band throughout the whole of that score. I love it. I agree, that Chris Cornell song definitely hits hard.
And maybe that's because the composer and the artist all worked together to make sure that there was some consistency through it. I love that. Walt, I'm going to ask you, because we are on a music-based show. We've got a guy here who breaks down music and does such a wonderful job he's done such a good job. I've already shared some videos on our Facebook private group that I hope he'll eventually want to join, just to see the fact that we do revere his work. Do you have a favorite Bond theme, since James Bond should be coming out later this year?
That's a great question. I know the ones that I hate.
Which ones do you?
Process of elimination.
Well, I was kind of thinking, listening to that conversation, and Alan and I have actually talked about this before. You do kind of have your Bond when you're growing up, right? So you have The Spy Who Loved Me and that era, the Roger Moore era, and it was when I was growing up. So I look back at those themes and I say, these are really the ones to me that are the real true James Bond themes. But there are some great ones, particularly in the last couple of movies. I didn't really like the last one, but that's a whole nother thing. But
I was not a big fan of Sam Smith's either, but
it
wasn't a great movie either. I think
they
somehow failed with the last movie.
So, but
he's I wish we had video now, because we're getting the pursed lip, like, I'm on with a couple of knuckleheads.
Yes,
they really don't understand what they're talking about.
I agree with you. I was not a huge fan of Spectre. I think Skyfall was an amazing film.
Yes.
But Spectre just felt like a bit of fan service. It felt too fan servicey.
Yeah, I thought so too. It almost derailed where I thought they were going with it, with a little bit darker, a little bit harder core Bond. But when you look at the way Bond has changed over the years, and with each different person taking the reign as Bond, the music has changed, culture has changed. You can't have 1960s music playing at the opening of a James Bond film and be relevant. So I try to bite my tongue and say, oh, I understand why they picked that piece of shit song to put as the opening. But I don't always. I just think there's so much good music out there. Why in the world? And I like the Radiohead song better. So I would have gone with that as well.
Can we all agree Madonna had no business doing a theme to any James Bond movie?
Madonna had no business doing a theme. I am 100% with you.
I will say, I mean, it's not a good song. It's not a good song, that Madonna song, but there is there's a nice little string riff that happens in that song.
But it had nothing to do with her.
Well, I don't know if it did or not, but it's quite good. I actually happened to listen to it the other day, and the song itself is not good, but the string riff is quite catchy. That was a song in itself, and they should have gone in a different direction. But
yeah, I will tell you. You talk about growing up. Roger Moore was my Bond only because that was I think Moonraker may have been the first Bond I ever saw in the theater. I know, if not theater, it was certainly the first I saw on quote cable TV, where you could actually see the whole movie at home without commercials. And so the John Barry theme, I've always loved him as a composer. I've always loved John Barry's work. But mine was for the longest time, because I was an 80s kid, was A View to a Kill. I was a Duran Duran fan. It was poppy. It was definitely 80s. But you know what? It also contained some of those Bond beats in the song. And I thought up until that time, it still was, I think until Skyfall, the only Bond song that went to number one on the Billboard.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that. And actually, that's got some great, that synth brass in that song. It's really good. Actually, I was going to say, I was thinking because I was thinking that back to the songs that I listed, I would probably have that high as well. And Live and Let Die is good as well. I couldn't not mention the Beatles.
I was going to say,
the first,
Live and Let Die,
the first Roger
I think
Moore
is still my favorite. I don't know that it's my favorite one that associates with the song, but it is, of all the Bond songs, my favorite.
Well, it's a song that if it came on the radio right now, you could turn it up and still be okay playing it. People wouldn't say, well, what movie are you watching? No,
Right.
You're listening to a rock
Absolutely.
song, you know?
Makes you give in and cry. Say, live and let die.
And I thought it was a really good Paul McCartney song. I thought he did a great job with it. It wasn't something that he just did to get a couple of dollars opening a Bond movie. It was obviously a good song. So, where I don't know that you always get that. It's almost like they go, okay, here's the name of the movie, go write a song, and they're like, how do I make this rhyme? This doesn't rhyme with anything. How does this work? So...
You know what I loved about that song, though? And I want to get our guest to weigh in on how just my naive musical brain tries to process this. Live and Let Die is like almost two songs meshed together, where it goes very slow, very melodic. But so does the James Bond theme. You've got the slower James Bond theme, the dun, 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 dun. But then you got the dun, 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 dun. And it's like really... And I feel like that captures the duality of what you get in a James Bond. The typical theme is just doing it in a rock.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is, but I would say that the Beatles song is more sort of spliced together, and actually it's got sort of three sections because there's the orchestral bit, there's the opening, there's the opening, there's that bit, and then there's the reggae bit, and then there's the orchestral bit. So actually, there's sort of three bits. Which is weird. It's sort of like a day in the life, actually. That where we had John Lennon and Paul McCartney writing two separate songs and they were literally just joined together. But did Paul McCartney? I don't know actually. Did Paul McCartney write the whole thing for Live and Let Die?
I know it's credited to Paul McCartney and Wings, which was his standalone band outside of the Beatles.
Oh, is it not? Is it not actually?
No,
Beatles?
It's a Wings song.
Oh no, yeah, it's a Paul McCartney.
Oh, okay. Well, I've always just assumed it was Beatles. There we go. I'm wrong.
Well, you know what? And I love it because now because you're right, the reggae, and you realize that they're going to have a part of that where you're talking about the islands and some of this voodoo mysticism. It's a great little callback to that sort of part of the world, the Caribbean islands and the areas where you might find a witch doctor or people practicing voodoo and belief in the black arts and things like that, like being able to read tarot cards. Okay, we've talked about those. Is there a terrible, like for you, Barnaby, what is the worst James Bond song? Or at the bottom, which ones are the ones that you're like, oh, dear Lord, I don't want to have to analyze this. This is horrible. I mean, we know Madonna's is a bad one. You like some of the string in it.
Madonna is quite bad. I think probably... I'm trying to think of them all now. I mean, Thunderball. Is it even called Thunderball? What's the one for? Is that it?
I think it is called Thunderball.
Is it called Thunderball? I think that one is quite, from my memory, that one's quite bad.
So he strikes like thunderbolt. He knows the meaning of success.
I think it's generally that sort of earlier period, because there was From Russia with Love. That was the second one, wasn't it? Because of Dr. No, From Russia with Love. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really feel very Bond-like From Russia with Love. I don't think they really knew what they had with their sort of IP.
From Russia with love, I fly to you, much wiser since my goodbye to you.
But then it sort of got better. Then you had the sort of Shirley Bassey era where it got amazing. with Goldfinger.
And I think that's why Thunderball doesn't work, because that was Tom Jones. They were thinking, well, we'll just get another, belter kind of singer. Just because Shirley Bassey pulled it off doesn't mean Tom Jones can
Because
pull it
Shirley Bassey, actually, I've been reading a lot about this recently, obviously, but for the video, but for unrelated as well. Shirley Bassey originally recorded a song for Thunderball, which then someone else recorded another song, and then Tom Jones recorded a third song. So I think Tom Jones was the third version of Thunderball, and you can sort of tell. I mean, he's a great singer. I love Tom Jones, but I just don't think the song really hits. And again, they want sort of versus the Shirley Bassey songs, which are sort of the iconic ones, apart from Tina Turner.
Well, let's face it, she's the only one to have done 3 Bond movies. She's the most reprised singer for a Bond thing. So there's something special about her.
Oh yeah, definitely. And did you know she wrote one for Quantum of Solace as well?
Where is the solace that I crave? Will it still haunt me to my grave? Too broken to forgive, too painful to relive now.
I heard that, and actually, I think I've heard the song, and I actually like it better than what was picked for Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, Quantum of Solace was something more Alicia Keys,
modern and edgy. Yes,
and someone Jack White.
I knew it was Alicia Keys. I can't remember who else was with her.
Someone else. Yeah, that one might be the worst.
Yeah, that one's pretty bad.
Yeah, that is. I feel terrible saying this. I've never say anything negative on my channel.
That's right. It's on mine, so it's on us. We've corrupted you.
Yeah,
we're the bad influence.
I was just a nice Brit before, but now.
Well, let's move to contemporary film scores, because we're talking about James Bond with a theme, which is usually just a song. You've done something in the last couple of weeks I've been watching where you really try to explain how, and I say the last couple of weeks, I may have stumbled across one that was a little older from when your channel, but I just happened to go back and watch them, that the score can't just be listened to by itself. It's great to analyze it by itself, but the score is really meant to accent what's happening in the story. And I love how you bring that about and use film clips in your videos to help explain and remind the audience that may have seen the movie before what is happening moment to moment. So can you take us through your process? Because it isn't just looking at the music, it is understanding it through the context of it's also supplementing the story.
Yeah, it's something that the people don't really either process that much when they're watching films. They don't think about the score, but it's actually all that I really think about. I think about what the music is doing at each point, and it's amazing if you watch documentaries of sort of composers working with orchestras and working with the directors, and especially John Williams, but also Thomas Newman and people like that. They spend hours and hours working out exactly what the themes are going to do, what keys they're going to go into, how they're going to change over the score, how they're going to work with every single beat in the scene, or not work with the beats in the scene. And basically that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to work out retroactively what's going on in the scene by watching a film multiple times and trying to work out what the overall process is. And I think you can analyze things by themselves, but the reason why they're effective is because of the way that the music is paired with the visuals. So I think there's only one way of analyzing film scores, which is to actually put the film on and to see it and try and understand it, the music in the context of the film. So actually, I've done this in sort of, well, now I've done 20. God, I've lost track of how many film score analyses I've done, but from The Shining to Jurassic Park and Star Wars and Up and E.T. and everything, and some of the greatest scores. And actually, the videos are a way of me trying to work out what's going on. It's a learning process for me, and you're basically seeing me learning by analysing the film. Because I'd never done it, I'd never done it before. People might ask what my film score experience is. My experience is watching films and obsessively listening to the scores, but never really analysing them in detail. But I think through the videos, I try and work out what I think the score is doing. And a lot of the time, it's my own opinion. It's not really based on research or based on reading interviews. Sometimes it is. It's usually I try and find these little nuggets. Like the best one I found, I think, was for the Interstellar score, where it's all Hans Zimmer uses the organ throughout the whole of Interstellar, and actually was recorded in Temple Church, which I've been to a few times in London. It's an amazing organ. I found out by listening to the score and also by watching the film multiple times that that uses C major, the key of C major throughout. and it starts with an ascending C major scale, and it finishes with an ascending C major scale, and actually it finishes with a top C as he's in the black hole and he's about to, there's this sort of denouement of the story, the sort of climax of the story. So no, I hadn't read that anywhere, but I just happened to find that, and there's those little moments of like, oh my god, that's amazing! I found this little thing that connects, the first music in the film to basically the last music in the film, and it's those things I'm looking out for, that I can try and find not only a connection in the score, but also like an emotional arc and how the score works with the narrative. I love the process. I think it's really fun.
Well, let me ask you, as somebody who's not a music person at all, I mean, I know what I like. I listen to a lot of music, but I'm not a professional by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I can sing a great flat, but but when you look at somebody like John Williams, obviously a complete genius at writing scores, and he's probably the closest I come to listening to classical music. But I love his scores, and when you, as a music professional and somebody who really knows a lot about music, you look at somebody like John Williams, how do you see his music standing alone apart from the musical scores? Do you think that his music is as amazing as it is because of what it does to the movie, or is he a standalone genius on his own?
I think John Williams is a standalone genius by himself. I think he decided to go down a particular route, but if he'd gone down any route, I think it would have been enormously successful. And he's a sort of slightly, I don't want to say old breed, but he is sort of an old guard of film composers, of that sort of golden age of Hollywood. He came out of that. But he started as a jazz pianist. He's an incredibly accomplished chamber pianist and jazz pianist. And he actually started by playing in jazz bars and by playing for scores for other films, and that's sort of how he got into it. But his music stands alone by itself as exceptional music, and he's written a lot of concert works as well, a lot of concertos, flute concertos and things like that, and orchestral pieces that weren't for films. He's definitely an astonishing composer. And actually, I think, although, yes, the films that he's best known for the work he's done in films and for elevating the films, but I would say that those films would nowhere near be as successful if his scores weren't attached to them. I really don't think Star Wars would have been Star Wars or Superman or Jaws or any of these had John Williams not have put his magic touch on. I think that is quite a rare thing. There are very, very few composers in the world who can do that, who can actually take a film. I mean, like Home Alone, for example. That, I was watching a video about Home Alone and how they just randomly asked John Williams, hoping he'd say yes, and he did. And he took that film, which was a B movie basically, for a very low budget, into a worldwide blockbuster. In my opinion, I think that he can elevate a film because he's such an exceptional composer.
Yeah, I agree. And when you look at Jaws, I think there's so much, if you're a student of film or just enjoy film, reading about the history of Jaws and some of the crazy things that happened around it is a great starting point if you want to learn about movies. And one of the things about Jaws is, from the very beginning, the music pulls you in because it is so emotional and so powerful right off the bat. It's energetic, but it's also kind of deep and woeful, and something's coming. And then it carries you throughout the movie, and every time that music starts, you're on the edge of your seat going, oh man, something's going down here.
It's amazing.
One of the things that I know that, thankfully, because of John Williams, he gave us the shark theme. So when you couldn't get the shark to work,
right,
you still knew it was there.
Right.
Yeah.
And saved the movie, I would imagine.
And it's so palpable, it's even better when it's not there.
Yeah. Definitely. And actually, the interesting comparison between that and Jurassic Park, where there is not really a theme for, there is a carnivore theme for the monsters, but the T-Rex doesn't have a theme. It's an interesting sort of comparison where Jaws, it's, the music of Jaws is the shark. There is a complete connection, whereas actually this was a slightly different approach in Jurassic Park. But he can do that, and he has the ability to create tension, and it's basically opera, isn't it? He's sort of he's literally manipulating you. he's going into your brain and he's pulling on your, nerve endings, and he's making you feel something. And Spielberg's not really doing this, the visuals aren't doing it. It's John Williams and his score. And so many people have that feeling because of the music. That's why I love it. I've got to do a film. Actually, I've already got a video planned on Jules. That's going to be coming up in the next few months.
Well, and here's the funny part. I would argue if you just listen to the seafaring music, he's written a pirate story. He's written a seafaring pirate story of ships at sea and engaged in some kind of pirate ship-to-ship battle, or in this case, man versus monster. It's very fun and it's very trippy. Yeah. And when they think they're winning, it's very uplifting and positive.
Yeah.
And yet he'll use some of those same themes when the boat's starting to sink, and you go, now you're playing it a little differently, and it doesn't feel so fun anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with Jurassic Park. Everyone dies, but it's great, peppy music, isn't it?
Well, you know what I love about Jurassic Park, speaking of, since we're all over the place, to me, I always thought he wrote a song you would play on a child's mobile, like over their crib. It sounds like that sort of nursery room, like that. The whole Jurassic Park theme could be played as just something you would play for a child. And then I realized it grows out of that childhood fantasy of Hammond to want to make dinosaurs. His first thing was a flea circus, so it's all make-believe. Everything in that movie is about make-believe, but when it comes to life, it's not exactly like you imagined it.
That is such a good take. I really should have spoken to you before I did my video on it. I just released a video on Jurassic Park. I should have used that.
Nah, feel free to go back.
You can't edit YouTube videos.
I know.
You could do a follow-on, just Jurassic Park redo.
Part 2, yeah.
Let's move to some of the newer composers, because you have hit Hans Zimmer, which I know there are people, and it's amazing. I think I'm right at that edge where I've got friends who are just a few years older that think like the John Williams, the Jerry Goldsmiths, the John Barrys, that's their composers. The Hans Zimmers are, it's too much synthesizer. There's no real construction. It feels all over the place, or it just repeats over and over. I'm like, you're not listening to the same score I'm listening to, because I think Hans Zimmer really understands film and understands his job is to make a piece that also supplements what's going on, not just story-wise, but what's happening on the screen moment to moment.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, actually, if you look at his process for every single film, it is very different. For The Dark Knight, they wanted to, creating a sound for the Joker, they used electronic cello and sort of really distorted, remember that sort of that single held note that goes throughout the whole of The Dark Knight?
Yes.
That is so intense. Whereas, if you look at something, something like Interstellar with the use of the organ, or if you look at Dunkirk, where they were trying to use the shepherd tone idea. I don't know if you've come across that. It's the idea of a constantly rising tone. So throughout the whole of Dunkirk, there's this feeling of escalating tension, and as if the music is constantly rising in pitch and also accelerating.
Right, like you think it can't go any higher, but it tricks you, because isn't it like you've got your treble, your bass, and your mids, and as one is coming to the top, the other one's also rising, so it tricks your ear into thinking like it's never gonna peak.
Exactly.
And at some point you go, it's gotta peak, but it doesn't, and that keeps you on edge.
It's amazing. And so he reinvents it every single time. And actually, the score I'm really excited about for with Hans Zimmer is Dune, the Denis Villeneuve film that's coming out. And there are a couple of tracks that have been released, and I haven't listened to them yet. But I'm really excited about that film because I love Denis Villeneuve's films. I loved Arrival. I thought with Johan Johansson's score was amazing. But I think it could be something really exciting. And Hans Zimmer turned down Tenet. In order to do Dune, so that's a big commitment. He's basically said no to Christopher Nolan to do a Villeneuve film, and I think, wow, that he must be really excited about this project. So I'm quite excited to see what it's going to produce.
I hope they pull that off, not only just cinematically, because I thought 2049 was beautiful.
Yeah,
It just, there weren't enough Blade Runner fans said that was worth going to the movie for. So
yeah,
but it was great. It's an awesome atmospheric trip for the eyes. I mean, it's what you would want from a Blade Runner sequel.
oh definitely. Yeah, oh yeah, I loved it. I've actually embarrassingly never seen Blade Runner. Even though the Vangelis score is really quite famous, but I've never seen it. But I've seen 2049, and I thought it was it's such a beautiful film, and also the score is really atmospheric and sort of perfectly captures, because I've listened to the Vangelis score from the original and really captures that sense in sequel.
It made me feel like, because the original Blade Runner was one of those movies that I grew up on watching over and over. I was part of that group that made it, like, brought it back to life because it failed in the theater, but would watch it on video and owned it, and everyone you meet my age was talking about, all the Gen Xers are talking about, gotta see Blade Runner. If you've never seen Blade Runner, you've got to see. And when I listened to the score of 2049, I thought they did a great job creating new themes, new elements, and yet anchoring it in the Vangelis score from the first one,
definitely.
where you still felt as if maybe they did bring Vangelis back on to be part of the score.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely got that feeling that they were sort of honouring it, but adding to it is sort of, and the same with the visuals as well. It was sort of a reimagining of the Blade Runner world, because I've seen little clips of the original, and you could definitely see the influence. But it's so haunting and so beautiful, and also the CGI is so mesmerising. There's that scene, isn't there, with the double. I can't remember exactly which scene it is. You have to cut this bit out because I can't remember. But I watched a whole video about the CGI in it. I think it might have been Corridor Crew. I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. So I'm really excited about Dune. That's the next one. I'm definitely gonna do a video on that if it's good. If it's a good score.
Well, that leads kind of to a question that I have. What movie scores do you think really don't fit? You watch a movie, you listen to the score, and you're like, were they even looking at the same thing? Are there any out there that you just think are terrible?
I mean, there are lots of quite bad film scores. In general, I tend not to remember them because I'm trying to think of sort of bad film scores, but I can only think of good film scores. The ones that I go a bit, there was potential there. For example, the later Harry Potter films, the 7 and 8 was Alexandre Desplat. I think it's pronounced Desplat or Desplat, and he's a fantastic composer, and actually he's written a lot of scores that I admire. But I feel like in general, and this is true for sort of the Marvel movies. I don't really watch the Marvel movies and the sort of Transformers movies. I tend to watch more sort of slightly more interesting. Not saying they're not interesting, but they're not really necessarily interesting for me. That sort of the approach to scoring where it's basically just repeated ostinatos, where you sort of take it's sort of action movie and you take a minor key and then you just repeat something over and over and over again, and it's doesn't really change much harmonically, doesn't really change much rhythmically, doesn't have a memorable melody, and those are the sort of scores that I go, there's potential here, but you're not really taking it anywhere. So and I feel the scores for the later Harry Potter films were sort of quite like that. Because if you go back to the earlier ones with John Williams scoring, it's a very different style, obviously, but I just feel they're more colourful and more alive. But there are loads of composers who are doing that nowadays. If you think about composers like Dario Marianelli or Thomas Newman or Randy Newman or James Newton Howard or Harry Gregson Williams or Hans Zimmer, they're actually creating really interesting, varied scores. They're not orchestral. A lot of them aren't orchestral. A lot of them are electronic. A lot of them using sort of rock influences and pop influences as well in terms of the harmony, but actually the sound, the colours they're creating are appropriate for the films. And I think sometimes either due to the composer rushing or they sort of miss the mark. And now that I say that, I've thought of another one. And I don't want to say anything against, because I love this composer, but I know that he was rushed for it. He's not going to listen. Well, he might listen to this. I don't know.
Well, we all have our bad days. So,
are you about to say the guy I'm about to bring up?
He just had a bad day.
Michael Giacchino.
I was.
He.
That's.
He's not coming on the podcast, is he?
I was just about to say, well, just after you knock the Marvel movies, I was like, well, have you heard Giacchino's score for Doctor Strange?
I haven't.
Which was fantastic. And I thought was something that you didn't hear necessarily in some of the earlier Marvel films. Because I am a Giacchino fan, and I was curious what you thought about him.
I'm a huge Giacchino fan. I've done 2 videos. I've done one on Up, and I've done one on Inside Out as well. I think his music is amazing. The one that I feel is slightly missing the mark is Rogue One. He was brought in, I think, quite late for Rogue One, and you get the feeling like he was just trying to recreate the Star Wars feel.
Yeah.
But in many respects, it would have just been so much better if he'd just gone his direction and been able to. And you get the feeling like there were some Disney bosses saying, you know, this has got to feel like Star Wars, and the music is so much part of that. And if John Williams is, I think it was the first Star Wars film that wasn't scored by John Williams. I know the Clone Wars and those weren't, but you know, he was trying to recreate that feeling and just didn't sound like Giacchino or John Williams, and so that doesn't do it for me, unfortunately. Michael Giacchino, if you're listening to this, which I doubt you will, but if you are, I love your film scores. See my videos.
Now, here's where I will argue, and maybe it's because fans like us growing up on the original trilogy were so let down by the prequels that when Rogue One came out, to me, it is the only prequel I have to watch, so I kind of think of it as the pre-Star Wars movie. And so in that respect, I like how some of the themes he reuses, but doesn't necessarily own, makes it sound like they come to their fruition in Star Wars as the follow-on.
Okay, interestingly, as growing up with the prequels, I see that as the John Williams sort of symphony from you know, episode 1, The Phantom Menace, to episode 8. Although to some people just to episode 6. Interestingly, the most popular comment on one of the most popular on my Star Wars video is because I say a 9-film epic, and people don't like that. people are quite cross about that. They're like, no, it's 6 films. And then some people are saying, no, it's 3 films. So you can't win.
Yeah, no, that's not one you're gonna ever win. Nope. Well, I got introduced to Giacchino in Star Trek, the reboot, which I thought was an amazing score because he did pull just enough of Star Trek to keep the Trek fans happy, but for the most part, it was unique. It was his own score, and I loved that. And I've just been kind of watching him as sort of like that next composer. And I think what I love about him is he has a background. I think, didn't he come out of the video games genre where he was writing scores for video games? And so I think that's what made him make that transition maybe a little more easily.
Oh, right. Well, I can definitely see that. Michael Giacchino would be great at that. I mean, I honestly, I would say that Rogue One is the only score that I think is slightly missing, but I think his work is amazing with Pixar in particular. I think for example, WALL-E is basically entirely reliant on Giacchino's score. There's so little dialogue in that film that almost entirely the narrative is determined by his score. So, you know, he had a huge job for that, but he pulled it off. He's one that, interestingly, you know, writes a lot of, he does write electronic elements, but uses that sort of orchestral sound, and you feel that's going back a little bit, not back, but, you know, he's harkening back to John Williams and that sort of sound in his scores.
Is there a composer that you feel like you gravitate toward more than any? We've talked about several. Obviously, we've mentioned only in passing Goldsmith and Barry, but there are so many good film composers, so many household names that even if you're not a music person and I say one of these, you're like, oh, I think I know that name. Is there one that you sort of gravitate toward more as far as affection for their style or their craft?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it is John Williams, actually, and just because of the scores that I know and love, you know, and also from films that aren't particularly very popular, like Hook and Home Alone. Home Alone is obviously very popular, but, you know, I've watched them so much when I was young. But I would say when I go onto Spotify and I'm listening to film scores, first and foremost, I just listen to anything new. So, for example, Natalie Holt's score for Loki, which is really good. The score by, I think it's Ludwig Göransson, I think that's how you pronounce his name, for the Mandalorian as well. You know, Hilda Gunnadita's score for Joker, and she did Chernobyl as well. If people say to me, what should I listen to in terms of film scores, I would actually just say, find the thing that you like, you know, find the thing you're watching at the moment, just go listen to the score. And it's amazing the experience that you can have in isolation. And actually, that's what I tend to gravitate towards. I tend to gravitate towards the things that I'm watching at the moment and the things that are sort of popular or things that are coming up. But if there's one composer that I always go back to, it's John Williams. It just gives me the feels, to use that expression. But he just makes me. It reminds me of my childhood, but it still feels fresh.
My last question, and then I'll kick over to Walt for him to wrap up. We didn't touch on Howard Shore, but one of my all-time favorite movies is The Lord of the Rings. I think of it as one movie told in 3 parts, just like the book was one book in 3 pieces. What do you think of Howard Shore's work in terms of amplifying that tale?
Well, I've made, for those who haven't seen it, I've made 3 videos on Howard Shore's scores, and those are some of my favourite videos. The way that he amplifies the tale is astonishing, and actually second to none in terms of the use of his motifs, his ideas that he not only repeats across 11 hours of film, but that he changes, subtly changes as the story changes, as Frodo gets further away from the Shire, as he starts to become more associated with the Fellowship, as the Shire theme sort of slightly disappears, and then the Fellowship theme starts to come more in, and then you have the Rohan and Gondor themes, and they change as their relationship changes. Then you have the Orc themes; they sort of get stronger. You get the sort of the themes of the Ring get louder and stronger as Frodo gets closer to Mount Doom. Think the planning that is required for this level of care to take these many motifs. I've got a huge book, very thick book of all the motifs and how they change over the course of these films, and it's astonishing. There's a huge amount of care and planning, and actually John Williams is amazing, and his scores for Star Wars are some of the biggest collection of music throughout all of film history. And he has developed the themes over the course of those films. But the problem with the Star Wars films is that, yes, George Lucas had a plan, but there's not the same sense of thematic development in the music as you do find in the Lord of the Rings scores. I think because they knew they were going to make those 3 films, Howard Shore knew he had to create one score for a single movie, as you say, and for a single narrative. And so he was like, okay, well, what's going to happen to this theme as Frodo goes from the Shire to Mount Doom? What's going to happen in that period? And through that, he created this gem of a score that I don't think has been repeated in any context. And I hope it is repeated again. But the question is to what trilogy or what book or what narrative, what story is it going to be? What story hasn't been told, or what story has yet to be written that's then going to have a score attached with it that's going to be as effective as Howard Shore's score? And I don't know the answer to that, and I genuinely hope that someone comes along. And maybe in another life, I would have liked to have done something like that, but instead I just idolise the great people.
What I find amazing about what Howard Shore did is he not only wrote the score for the theatrical releases, but the even better director's cut versions had to go in and add literally 30 to 45 minutes worth of additional music because of the length of each of those. And that is the only version that I think is worth watching. My wife and I will do a marathon once a year of just those 3 movies, one movie a day, or on a long weekend, maybe 2, and then the wrap up on the next day. And it is just, you feel like you've gone out on just an emotional journey. You feel physically and mentally like you've been along with the entire Fellowship. And I think the music is a big piece of that.
Oh yeah, definitely. A huge piece of that. And I haven't done a marathon in a while. I think I'll do one now. So thank you.
Well worth doing.
Well, Barnaby, where can people find you if they want to check out some of your videos?
So you can find me, just search for Listening In, or go to youtube.com/listening in. And you can also find me on Twitter as Barnaby Martin /listening in. So if you go and find me on YouTube, I've just recently hit 100,000 subscribers, actually.
Oh, congratulations.
Which is great, and I'll hopefully be getting a plaque soon at some point. That's the reason why we're doing this, isn't it? It's just for the plaque. But yeah, so you can find me on there.
We want you guys to go to his channel. We want you to grow the audience, subscribe, because it's not just a labor of love. It takes a lot of time, and to get at least some kind of a monetization from your subscribers, I think is well worth subscribing to your channel. I just am absorbed by how much I'm trying to learn, and I wish I knew more about notes and keys and chords and structure, but you still do it in a way that I don't feel totally lost. I understand what you're explaining.
Good. I'm really pleased. That's what I aim for anyway.
All right, so tell us again, it's listening in on YouTube.
Listening in on YouTube or youtube.com/listening in. Or my Twitter is Barnaby Martin /listening in.
You don't have a Facebook or Instagram or TikTok?
I've got nothing
or,
else. I've got no Twitch, no Instagram. I'm just in 2 places. Or my Patreon account. You can find me at Patreon if you'd like.
Folks, if you got some dollars to set aside, do it. Every now and then you stumble across folks on YouTube that are really, really using the internet for good, for, positive, not just growth and understanding, but it's a chance for you to hear and understand the love he has of music and scores and explaining to you, and the love of explaining to you, the listener, why this musical journey happens the way it does, and how the notes are deconstructed, or how the notes build, or how they stay in a different key until they're ready for that heroic, triumphant move toward the end or wherever. And it gives you such an understanding of how music really does go along with that emotional ride of watching a movie or just being emotionally taken on a journey, whether you're just listening and in your mind reliving the movie. To me, a good score is when I can listen to the score and I'm watching the movie in my head. Definitely.
I couldn't have put it better myself. That was a perfect channel trailer. Thank you.
Yep, that's why I love the Blues Brothers score so much.
That's a whole different... That's a soundtrack.
That is a soundtrack.
To me, it is a score.
Barnaby, we will stay in touch, and certainly as you grow your channel, we'd love to have you back, especially as Dune comes out. I will probably be one of the first people in the theater.
Oh, me too.
I just cannot wait. I hope that there is more than just a group of Dune people out there, because there's not enough to make it a blockbuster. We need everybody to go, what's this Dune movie? And come on out there. So I hope it's as good as I'm wanting it to be.
I hope it's good because I hated the first one so much.
I haven't seen it.
They've had so many iterations. There is one version that's okay, the second cut, and then they tried a third cut. But even then, I'm waiting for this movie to do it right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Barnaby, thank you so much for being with us here on The Wilder Ride.
My pleasure. My pleasure. See you.
All right. Well, awesome to have had Barnaby with us. Wish he could have hung out, but we also understand people have lives and they've got to do what they've got to do. But that's okay. We've still got more to do with this episode, including our next segment, a segment where Walt gets to look at a movie and review it. And it's a great movie. It's a wonderful movie. No, it's not. It's nothing close to that. It's a horrible movie. This is a segment we like to call...
God, what is this? Stop it! I don't get me out of this hell!
And Walt, this was different. You actually were forced to watch 2 movies from the last poll, because just when you thought one won, no pun intended, just when you thought one had gotten the most votes, you went to sit down and all of a sudden a bunch more came in for a different one.
Yeah, apparently while I was watching the other one, which turned out to be burning garbage too, several more votes came in for Terror Birds. So I decided to honor both those votes and did the other one last week, and then Terror Birds gets this week's nod.
Yay! Let's hear about Terror Birds.
Well, I don't know how much you want to hear about this. It appropriately, well, I don't know. This may even be a little high. There are 303 votes on IMDb, and it gets a 3.5. I would say more in the 2.8 range, or maybe a 1.0 range. It is painful. The acting is mediocre, the writing is terrible, and the CGI looks like a child drew these birds with crayons. There's also about a 40-minute run in this movie where you never even see the terror birds. You don't hear them. It's just kind of like people walking around and trying to figure out what's going on somewhere, and you really lose interest. I had no empathy towards any of the characters. None of the characters were developed well, and even the end of the movie is really lame. And you know that they're setting the ball on the tee for Terror Birds 2, which, if there's any justice in the universe, there will not be a Terror Birds 2. But the one...
That good, huh?
Oh, it was awesome. It is not. I mean, this movie is not watchable. There are so many other good choices, like staring out your window or going to the dentist, other than watching this movie. It is just awful. Do not reward this bad behavior by watching this movie.
There you go. I like that. That you've never said that before. Do not reward bad behavior. It'll only encourage them to do more.
Absolutely. So do not click on this movie. And if you watch the trailer, you can see how bad this is going to be. The one bright spot to this movie is that the bad guy is played by an actor named Greg Evigan. Does that name ring any bells?
Yes, he was the BJ and the Bear, right?
BJ and the Bear. He played BJ from BJ and the Bear. So the one bright spot is that I was like, wait a minute, I know that guy. And then I realized towards the end who it was. But his death in this movie, like, you know, you want him to have a horrible death. He doesn't. It's just, it's like a 2-second death. And the bad thing is they set the Terror Birds up as being so ferocious that they can't really do anything but that. So there's not one moment of tension in the entire movie. It's just really lame. But if you go and look at what Greg Evigan has been working on over the years, the last few years particularly, you see why he took Terror Birds. He had Once Upon a Holiday, something called Overheads. He did one CSI episode, and Shadow on the Mesa were his shows right before this, his shows and movies. So he really did not have much of a career going. And I guess Terror Birds crossed his desk and he thought, well, it can't hurt.
I mean, I did act with a chimp.
He did act with a chimp. He actually should have gone back and acted with a chimp again. That would have been much better. I forgot to read the summary from IMDb. So here's the summary that IMDb gives us. When Maddie Stern discovers her father has gone missing during a routine birdwatching excursion, she and her college pals trek out into the wilderness to find him, only to end up in a wealthy scientist's desolate ranch aviary where they encounter a pair of giant, hungry terror birds believed to be extinct for centuries. So that's...
Well, wait a minute. Are these supposed to be pterodactyls?
No.
Or are they just birds?
Nope, they are terror birds. They look like toucans. So they look like toucans with, like, dinosaur arms and these giant big bird feet. So
strange.
It is so strange. And you can tell that a couple of times when the terror bird shows up, the timing is wrong and the actors aren't ready for the terror bird to be there. They're not acting against it. So it wasn't even like they had an actor standing in for the terror bird so that they could see what's going on. I mean, this is just a train wreck. And it is so awful. The one thing about it that I kept thinking was they basically tried to remake Jurassic Park in some weird ways. And there were tons of either allusions to Jurassic Park or just flat out theft from Jurassic Park. But it was like a 10-year-old in Pee Wee football trying to steal ideas from someone on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, it obviously was not a good imitation. So this is garbage. Do not, as I said, do not watch it because we don't want any more clicks on this piece of garbage than we can possibly stand. All of these people should be removed from IMDb, with the exception of Greg Evigan because he gets a pass for the rest of his life because of BJ and the Bear. Everybody else here should be stripped of their SAG cards and sent into other careers where they can live in disgrace.
Wow. Well, there you have it, folks. That's why we want you to vote every week in the poll. Thankfully, this time, because Walt got ahead of himself, the poll was still left open. He got to do 2 of the 3 videos. So I guess you got to get a new poll up here pretty soon for the next week.
Yeah, we'll have a new poll up tomorrow.
All right, cool. All right, well, let's move into our next segment, a segment we like to call
It's no bullshit.
Here's a chance for us to go through the internet and find some news stories that we know are true because we found them online. And Walt, you've got the first news story.
I do have the first one. And since we had a guest with us from the UK, we're going to start with the UK. This comes from London. Couple enjoying a romantic anniversary dinner were left shocked after being gate crashed by a nudist cruise.
There's something you don't see every day.
Ooh, whoops.
A couple enjoying a romantic anniversary dinner on water got the shock of their lives when they caught sight of a boatload of nudists.
And I got to be honest with you. I've said this joke before. The people who are the first ones willing to just strip off their clothes are usually the last people you want to see naked.
The last ones who should. Yes, absolutely right. And it looks like in this situation that was true. John Wood and his wife reportedly had been enjoying a meal at the River X Cafe on the X estuary in Devon when the naked passengers waved to them from their passing boat. The couple were reportedly baffled to see the partygoers stark naked, but soon realized the ship was actually the Torbury Sun Club's annual nude cruise, where naturalists set off from the Exmouth dock. The aim is for nudists to meet and socialize with like-minded people while they travel on board in nothing but their birthday suits. Luckily, many diners on board John's boat found it rather amusing, with many whipping out their phones to take a snap.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Some were concerned for passengers' safety, though, due to heavy winds, which were reportedly picking up, and the cooler conditions weren't suitable for those in the buff. The wife and I were having a lovely anniversary dinner at the River X Cafe when we caught sight of a boat full of naked people traveling slowly, John told Devon Live. Reaction in the restaurant was mostly of amusement and concern for their health as the wind was getting up. Luckily, that was the only thing that was.
It's no bullshit.
Oh, good. Oh, see, that this happened. My wife and I, we went to one of our first cruises we ever did. We stopped in a little town in Mexico, and we had an off excursion to do some scuba diving, and which was great. But while we were going through sort of the rudimentary about, making sure we're comfortable with the equipment and making sure that we know how to inflate and deflate the vest to keep buoyancy, all of a sudden we look over and there's this old dude who has just slowly reached down and pulled a towel across his waist.
Oh, no.
And he's sitting there, and then all of a sudden he hikes his knees up, and I realize his balls are hanging down below his towel.
Ugh.
He was sitting there in the buff and at least tried to cover himself up, but age and gravity had taken their toll, and that towel just wasn't wide enough to cover. And I told my wife, I'm like, I can't help but staring. She goes, I know. I keep looking, and I'm like, it's not attractive. There's nothing about it that's there's nothing appealing, enticing, or anything, and yet I keep looking at it like a train wreck.
Well, sometimes you just gotta get some fresh air.
Some people just didn't think they were going to have a couple of folks scuba diving on their beach.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the story we had a few weeks ago of the naked guys that got chased into the woods by, what was it?
A deer.
By the deer. That's right. So, yeah.
Too funny. All right. Well, how about this story? I've got one here about, and whenever you're going to be sentenced for something in Russia, they're serious about it. A Russian man has been sentenced to prison for tormenting his neighbors with horse noises.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, look, we've all had our share of lousy neighbors. Maybe they didn't mow the yard, they might not be as overly friendly, or maybe they just want to be left alone. Both, whatever. But as long as they're not noisy, right?
Exactly.
Most of us are lucky in that our neighbors usually don't torture us with obnoxious behavior to the point that they get sent to jail. Some folks in Russia, however, had to resort to help from the justice system from a belligerent neighbor. According to this, a Russian court served Yuri Kondratiev, age 46, a 3.5-year prison sentence. 3.5 years, Walt, for disturbing his neighbors.
That's brutal.
And you think, how bad could it be? Well, that may seem harsh at first glance, but this Nizhny Novgorod man wasn't your usual loud next-door inhabitant. For 2 years, he had been practically torturing his neighbors with his behavior. He started off playing loud music late into the night, but as time went on, his antics got more outlandish. By the end of his reign of terror, Kondratiev would make or play horse noises every 2 hours in the night just to re-wake up his neighbors and make sure they couldn't get a wink of sleep. According to this, it's understandable the neighbors got to the breaking point. They called the police again and again and again. In fact, there were 80 complaints about their neighbor to police. It didn't seem to have an effect, though, since most of the times the police just let him off with a slap on the wrist. However, after a period of time, somebody in the justice system finally decided to look back over time and realized what was going on. The noisy neighbor was brought into court, and rather than hit with a misdemeanor, he was literally hit with a torturing others charge, a charge of torture.
Oh my gosh.
Which carried with it a minimum of 3+ years, sentenced to 3.5 years for inflicting emotional and mental suffering on his neighbors.
It's no bullshit.
Holy cow.
You don't mess with Russian system.
Man, no kidding.
But still, 80 calls to the police. I mean, it shouldn't have lasted that long.
That is ridiculous.
Something should have been done a lot sooner than that. So the justice system may be a little more harsh, but if I were the neighbor, I'm surprised they put up with it.
Oh, well, they don't put up anything with anything in Russia. I mean, you comply. That's just how it is. For example, the woman in our next story would be in real trouble in Russia. This comes from KELO in South Dakota, and it's South Dakota, so you know it's going to be good. Henry, South Dakota, a woman has been taken into police custody following the theft of a tractor near Henry, South Dakota on Friday. According to a release from the Clark County Sheriff's Office, officers responded to a reported gas drive-off in Henry. Law enforcement located the vehicle and attempted to make a stop, but it did not yield. Authorities say a collision occurred with another motorist, forcing the vehicle into a ditch, which the driver fled on foot. Around 5:50, police received a report of the tractor being driven west of Clark, with a woman matching the description of an earlier report. Officers responded to the scene where a John Deere tractor failed to yield to law enforcement.
How adorable!
Eventually, officers managed to get the tractor to stop near 421st Avenue on U.S. Highway 212. Jaden Durick was taken into custody. Sorry, Jay Durick. Didn't mean to impugn your reputation. Jaden Durick was taken into custody. Durick is being held on a $20,000 cash-only bond and is being charged with a looting, burglary, and grand theft tractor. The investigation is ongoing.
It's no bullshit.
Oh my goodness gracious. That's horrible.
So she managed to fill her tractor up at the gas station, take off, run over a car, and then run a police car off the road. So, heck of a day there, Jaden.
Having fun. Yeah, she's lucky she wasn't in Russia.
Yeah, the Russians would not have put up with that one.
All right, this one, although we have a Safe for Work podcast, you know we like to creatively bleep, you might need to cover the kids' ears or bring the volume down. I'll just read the headline first, and then we'll dive into the details. Unknown man is calling libraries so he can masturbate to a court case.
Holy cow.
Oh, bro.
You're saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? According to this story, an unidentified man is calling around to local libraries and asking them, could you please pull up the case Brady vs. Maryland from 1963? He'll claim he doesn't have a computer and needs the librarian to read the case file out loud so he can take notes. Now, any good librarian trying to help somebody out in their time of need gets the file and soon begins to read the court proceeding. A very boring case about whether or not you're supposed to supply any evidence, including any exculpatory evidence, that could help the other person get out of whatever you're trying to get them in trouble for. While reading, nothing lascivious in the case, nothing untoward, it becomes clear the man is pleasuring himself. How can you tell? By the noises. He'll say things like, "Oh, yeah, give it to me." Or, "Oh, I want that exculpatory evidence. Give it to me. Come on, spank those prosecutors. I want it bad."
Oh.
This man has apparently harassed librarians in several states, and the reason we know that is thanks to forums and social media. One anonymous librarian actually detailed their encounter, and come to find out it was picked up by other librarians who happened to notice the similarities of what happened to them. Turns out there's a couple of ways you can derail this guy. One, when you realize you're getting the phone call, if you're a male or you put a male on the phone to say, "Hey, can I help you?" he immediately hangs up. Second is to just not participate in the phone call. He's called multiple libraries. The FBI is supposedly involved, but so far has not been able to catch the pervert that's calling libraries and asking librarians to read about the case Brady versus Maryland. So, public safety announcement or public safety tip. If you are a librarian, beware of somebody who's asking you to pull up a court case from 1963 and read it to them. Unless you've been a very lonely person yourself, it could be a fun two-way conversation.
It's amazing. It's astounding. But it's no bullshit.
Oy vey. Well, I hope they find this guy, and I hope he resists arrest. He needs just a
I just love because they're the quotes of the librarian. You'll hear him say, "Oh, give me that exculpatory evidence. Oh, spank those prosecutors." And apparently, according to the story, if I read into more detail, you can hear other noises, including generally when he's finished.
Society is a disaster.
I weep. I weep for the direction we're going. So, okay.
Wow. Just wow.
Well, now let's go ahead and move to our last segment. Let's pick things up. Our entertainment segment. This is a chance for us to talk about what it is we're watching, what it is we're listening to, and what it is we're reading, if anything. Let's go first to watching. Walt, we'll start with you. Anything that you've been watching this week?
Well, the Olympics are on. So that's pretty awesome and will be for the next couple of weeks. But I've also heard that this is the least watched Olympics in 35 years. So I don't know what's going on there. But yes, I've been watching the Olympics. I was watching table tennis and some other fun stuff earlier, but the good stuff gets going next week. So,
well, we've been doing very good early on in swimming, which has been great. I think we had the first time ever a 3-time skeet shooting champion, female.
Yes.
And I think the first time ever female taekwondo gold medalist.
I believe that's right. And then today we won several table tennis matches and other stuff. So yeah, we're doing pretty well so far.
Yeah, I'm going to keep up with the medal count. I think I've seen in a couple of places that we were at in Blue Ridge when we were going from one bar to another, when the Olympics were on, they were playing on TVs, but I haven't really sat down and watched any of the Olympics.
Yeah, today really was the first time I have sat down for any length of time and watched it. I had it on at work, but I'll be watching it the rest of the time. Also, I found on Hulu, Hill Street Blues is on there. And I don't know if you've ever watched Hill Street Blues, but it was really one of the early, actually gritty cop shows. You know, Adam 12 was good, but it was kind of clean and neat, and, you know, not too much blood and guts. But
well, how does it compare to the one that you always are talking about? Was it Homicide: Life in the Streets?
It is a good. It kind of led the way towards us having shows like Homicide that were single camera type shows that were even more gritty and down to earth, or, you know, true to earth. But it's pretty close. I mean, there's some more comedy in it and things like that, but it's a very good show, and it really gets that whole genre going of the more gritty police drama.
Well, I've always enjoyed those sort of evening sitcom type, not sitcom, evening, what's the word? soap opera-ish,
Like
where there's like the
drama.
ongoing stories
Mhm.
of the characters. You're following their arcs while they're also either solving a crime, or if it's a hospital drama, what's the surgery that's going on. But that's always secondary to like the characters.
Yeah,
My favorite still is Bosch as far
Bosch
as
is-
detective series.
Yeah, far and beyond. Yeah, and I think serial drama is the term you're looking for.
Serial drama. Okay, I'll go with that.
So, if not, we just invented that, and that's copyright the Wilder Ride.
Wilder Ride. Send your checks.
So, and then the last thing is, I stumbled across a great little documentary called "The History of the Sitcom," and it goes back to the early days of the sitcoms, why they're popular, how they got started, breaks those down, and brings us up to modern day. So that also is on Hulu. I think it's on another platform as well. But History of the Sitcom, 6 episodes. I think they're working on a season 2. So that's a pretty good one. I'm on episode 1, but it's great so far. So check that out.
Excellent. Well, speaking of law series, I've sort of been dropping back in. My father-in-law was suggested to try Longmire, which isn't as good as Bosch, but it's still an entertaining show.
But it's a great show.
I had stopped watching it midway through season 6, and then I heard him catching up to where I was, so I've been watching a few episodes with him. With the vacation this past weekend and a lot going on, that's really the only television I've watched, but I keep up with 4 of my YouTube channels, and I will just give those to you all now. We had one on today, Listening In. That's one I love to check when there's a new episode. Doesn't happen every week, but there's a lot of older material you can go through, and obviously I'm subscribed, so I'll know when a new one drops.
Mm-hmm.
Popcorn in Bed, that's always fun. She's just such an innocent, sweet, young woman who just decided to start a YouTube channel about reaction to videos. She grew up only watching rom-coms. That's it. That was her. So she's watching all these other things that she would have never normally watched. It's fun to watch that. I think she just watched Arrival, which was amazing to see her response to that. Ashley Burton is just always funny. She's the one that does the Millennial Movie Mondays, but her channel is just Ashley Burton. And the last one is a guy who was on our show, The Daily Doug, doing Iron Maiden, or now he's changed it to Metal Mondays. So he loves to he's a classically trained musician and composer who likes to review metal and see how the chord structures follow. A little bit like our guest today, but more about looking at how can he take what he does as a score person or a musician, and how does it apply to maybe non-traditional music that he wouldn't normally think to listen to.
Very cool.
All right, on to reading.
Well, I'm still working through that Star Trek book. I've not gotten as far as I've wanted to. I did order one of the books that our guest last week talked about on the American road trip, so I'm going to try to get that one going, and in all my spare time. So we'll see. If I get into that, I'll update you. Otherwise, we'll do an update next season.
All right, I'm pretty much in the same boat with as much of the planning of the trip and getting out to town and trying to get all the things done. My wife and I was sort of along for the ride with all of the stuff. We were creating unique gift bags and stuff to go with each of the rooms. And so everyone was surprised, but I kind of knew what was happening because I was helping with a lot of Photoshop work, and my wife was doing a ton of work to be ready. So didn't do any reading really last week outside of the news, which of course is something that's an ongoing thing. So let's wrap up with listening. What have you, Walt, been listening to?
I have actually been listening to a lot of stuff, but I'm just going to mention a few of them real quick. Radio Labyrinth, of course, I try to listen to every week. That's our great friend, Tim Andrews, Jeff Lieboff. And Tim is also posting a lot of great pictures of his son, Gilbert. The 50-year-old proud father is seeming to do well.
Somehow still awake.
Yeah, he's still awake. I think he's been awake for about 3 months. I actually sent him a text today just to see how they were doing, and he and his wife and Gilbert are all doing great. So we're really excited about that. Maybe we can get Tim on late in the season just to give us an update on their family. But they're doing really, really well, and Tim's just a great guy. So check out Radio Labyrinth. That's always a great show. I mean, week in and week out, they do a fantastic job. Also, I've been talking about this for a few weeks. The show wrapped up last week, but I really want to reemphasize Camp Hell Anawake. Maybe one of the best podcast series I've listened to in a while. And this will be the last time I'll mention it unless they drop another episode. But they wrapped up last week with episode 10, and it is just a horrifying story, but I think it's an important story to tell. So check that out. Again, it was done by iHeartRadio, and it's called Camp Hell Anawakey. I hope that this team will follow with another series that covers that. And then finally, Pete Davis. And we've talked about him before. He's a sports guy from Atlanta. He has a great podcast called Holy Crap It's Sports. Comes out once a week, I believe, and he covers all kinds of sports news. So he has a unique take on things, but he's written several books. We're hoping to get him on. I've sent him a couple of follow-up notes to see if we can get him on the show here. But Pete Davis, or you can either search for Pete Davis or you can search for Holy Crap It's Sports. He covers sports nationally, so it's not just limited to Atlanta. But really great podcast I really enjoy, and he's one of those great podcasters that does it from his kitchen table, and at times he's like, wait a minute, was that this guy or that guy that did that? And he'll look it up as he's talking, and so there's some good kind of self-effacing humor, and Pete's just a great guy, so check that out.
Hopefully we'll get him on here pretty quickly. I know you've been working on it.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, outside of Radio Labyrinth, which of course I give 2 thumbs up to as well, I certainly listen. Started the Great Escape Minute. It was a new Movies by Minutes podcast from a guy who was, I don't know if he was born, but he actually moved from Michigan to Israel, is in Israel right now. Started off with a podcast partner in the U.S. and then just did the same thing where he brought on guest hosts to look at a classic World War II flick. A lot of people enjoy it as an homage to World War II, although it is not anywhere close to historically accurate in terms of names and things that happened. It is an amalgamation of what happened, and so some of the events that are actually in the movie are true. Not all of them, but some. So check out The Great Escape Minute. If that's a movie you like, they're breaking it down 1 minute at a time. 60MW podcast, our friends from across the pond, just added a new show. They brought on a woman who has been making her career as a film critic for both independent labels and some other film markets. She writes the stuff you might read inside the DVD or on their web pages or in blogs. She's a freelance movie reviewer / critic, and her name's Amy, and she has partnered up with Tina, and because of their letters, they call it the T&A Show. And it's 2 ladies who are going to try to review movies that aren't typically thought of as chick movies or ladies movies. For example, their warm-up was, they only did it as a warm-up. They did 60 Shades of Grey, and needless to say, they both vomited all over it. It is a terrible, terrible movie. But their first true release is going to be coming up where they plan to break down Predator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger flick. So they really want to break the stereotype that ladies only like watching dainty historical fiction or romantic comedies. They'll probably hit some of those, but they do enjoy action movies and what are typically thought of as testosterone-fueled action films. So they're going to watch a bunch of those too and review them.
Very nice.
So the T&A Show, check it out. A personality that I didn't realize was starting his own podcast, I just started listening to the Jason Durden Show, doing something similar to what we started with seasons 3 and 4, becoming more of an interview podcast, but that's all he does is the interview, doesn't have the other segments. And a shout out for me and my wife, the Marriage Fit podcast. We like to try to put an episode out once a week.
Very cool.
So that's going to do it. We are done and in the books.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, we will look forward to whoever our surprise guest is next week.
Yeah, before we tease the fact that we don't have any clue who's on the schedule, Walt, somebody who may have known Barnaby, and maybe Barnaby put something out on his YouTube and drove people to hear us for the very first time. Where can they get more of us? And let them know that we actually have 2 shows under the brand, technically.
We do, and the best place to find out everything about us is on our website, which is thewilderride.com. And there you can go to episodes and you can check out our past guests. And the way we started this podcast was breaking down the movies of Gene Wilder, thus The Wilder Ride. And we were doing them in 1-minute segments. So that every minute of the movie was an episode of our podcast. And we had a variety of guests that joined us in season 1 for Young Frankenstein, which is still my favorite Gene Wilder movie. Season 2 was Blazing Saddles, which is way up there as one of my favorites and just a fantastic, awesome movie. And then we got derailed last year and ended up doing this version of our show where once a week we brought in a guest and interviewed them, threw a couple segments in, and have had fun there. So check us out again at thewilderride.com, or as Alan referenced earlier, you can go to facebook.com/thewilderride and follow us and hit the button that'll pop up right after you follow us that says join our listeners group. The listeners group has no politics, no craziness, no stupidity. Well, I take that back. There is some stupidity.
You and I are on there, so I mean.
But it's just entertainment and talk about our show and reminders of who our guests are. And you'll see some posts every once in a while about the commander of the International Space Station, who was on our show last season, and other fun things. So check all that out. And also you can contact Alan and I at our Gmail, thewilderride@gmail.com, if you want to email us.
Whatever podcatcher you're listening to right now, take a second to hit that share button. Share it on social media. Put it on Twitter. Put it on Facebook. Put it on Instagram. Put it everywhere, wherever. Help us out. Be our marketing arm.
Absolutely.
An unpaid member of our staff, much like the people who own the Wilder Ride. We are also unpaid, so should you be. But no, seriously, thank you for helping us out with that. Also, if you want, take a second to rate and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to be able to hear from you, and who knows, we might even spotlight you on our comments section of the website, thewilderride.com. And come on back next week. We actually have somebody that's sitting in the wings. They were waiting between 2 dates. We finally have come to the tipping point. We're going to hopefully have a guest that we know, or we're going to find somebody we're going to throw in at the last second. No matter what, you're going to have a guest. You just got to come back, because
that's right.
I don't know who's coming, so you don't know who's coming. Hey, we're all in the same bucket.
Absolutely.
Neither one of us knows who's coming. Not even breathing hard.
It'll be a surprise, and it'll be our best show ever.
It will, because we don't know what to even say. So,
exactly.
So come on back next week for another episode of the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge.
Awesome.
Today was fun. Today was a little different. We didn't have to necessarily go into his whole backstory and history. It was more about just understanding his love of music. That was cool.
No, I thought it was great. And I'm not even that big of a fan of movie scores, so kept me interested the whole time, so that says a lot.
Actually, I'm going to have to schedule more guests like that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had your attention. Either that or it's because you knew you were getting out of 2 hours out of work.
Well, that too.
That didn't hurt.
When you hit the dance floor, you gotta be jumping jack.
Jump on in, jump, jump in.
When you hit the dance floor, you gotta be jumping jack.